We're very happy this evening to have with us Miss Kristy Kryszczak and her book, Unexpected Love. A former actor and beauty publicist in New York City, Kristy relocated to Naples, Florida to enjoy all the coast has to offer. When she isn't creating captivating fictional love triangles, Kristy is busy working as a director of special events and communications. She also blogs about her adventures living on Florida's Paradise Coast, the writing, marathon training, and aspiring to live with gumption. She is a dog mom to her cockapoo, Maisie May, and enjoys cooking and hosting get-togethers with her family and friends. Let's give her a nice big round of applause.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. I'm Kristy Kryszczak, and I'm happy to share with you a bit about my new novel, Unexpected Love. Thank you to all of you out there on the internet, and welcome for watching as well. I'm really happy to be here, especially in Florida, talking about my book because I'm now a local Floridian, and it's so nice to come here and just visit different places and establish myself as a local author. This book experience started about 3.5 years ago, and while I was living in New York City, so a lot of my inspiration came from New York and Naples. I've always wanted to write a novel. I've always been involved in the arts, majored in writing in college, always did a bit of creative writing, and finally one day about 3 years ago sat down in my tiny apartment in New York on my bed, opened my laptop, and started writing. Originally I thought that my book would be about a relationship I had in New York that had ended, but that quickly changed, and it evolved into something completely different, and the whole writing experience itself is extremely exciting and interesting along the way. So I wrote the book on and off. I wasn't on a schedule in New York. I pretty much wrote when I felt like it, sometimes early morning, sometimes in the evening after work, sometimes at coffee shops. And then once I moved to Naples in June 2015, I had a lot of my story established and I was ready. Everything was clear to me and I was ready to finish. So as soon as I moved down here, was on a writing schedule, and I would wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, sit out back and write by the lake. And shortly thereafter, I had my first draft finished, which was really nice. The editing process was very different for me. That was a learning experience in itself. I felt like I was getting a master's in English. So working with developmental editors, copy editors, proofreaders, and then the book cover design. It was all really fun and interesting and something completely different than anything I've ever experienced. It might have even been harder than writing the first draft itself. I would say I learned a lot from the developmental editor, just about creating and building more on my storylines. And one of my favorite characters in my book, Ruby, with help of my developmental editor, that character came to life. And then the copy editor was really wonderful. She understood me and we worked very well together. And then the book cover designer was very important because when writing this book, I wanted it to be something that I would enjoy reading, so something lighthearted, something that maybe touches at your heartstrings. And then the cover itself, I'm very big on, if a cover is aesthetically pleasing to me, I'm automatically attracted to the book. And that happens with a lot of things in life. So I was really happy and pleased with how everything turned out, and I knew I wanted it to be exactly as I wanted before I would put it out there for the world to see. So 3.5 years later, this fall, the book actually launched, which was very exciting, and it still feels very surreal as well. A lot of people, friends and family especially, as they were first reading the book, have asked me what my inspiration has been and where I got all my inspiration from. And inspiration actually comes from so many different places. A lot of, again, as I mentioned before, New York and Naples, those locations were familiar to me because I lived in New York for almost 16 years. And then Naples, I recently moved here, but I traveled often before with my family, and then my family moved down here, so I had a lot of experience in Naples as well. But those two locations, it was interesting to write a book being in those locations just because I knew of a lot of the locations. I was familiar with the sights, the sounds, the smell, so that's why I chose those as the two main locations in my book, and the different restaurants and streets and everything that you'll see if you read it or if you haven't read it yet. And another thing, people ask me if characters are based on individuals that I know. Sam, who is Inez's best friend, she's the one character that I would say is based on a real person in my life. So she's based on my friend Simone, and my friend Simone's from New York, and a lot of her mannerisms and dialogue comes from Simone, so that was interesting and fun to think about while writing it, just because I thought back to all of my memories with Simone in New York. Inez is the main character. She's the protagonist. A lot of her mannerisms, I would say, are based on me. Her clothes that she wears, her food that she likes to eat, her places that she visits, I would say that a lot of that came from me. And then that helped with the dynamic between Inez and Sam. The two men in the book, Jimmy and Jason, actually aren't based on anyone at all. They're based on pure fiction. Which is interesting. A lot of people ask, they all thought everything was based on an ex-boyfriend, but it didn't turn out to be that way. They're not based on anyone that I know, except for the only thing with Jimmy is one of my favorite TV shows is Shameless, and I was watching it a few seasons ago, and Nick Gelfus was on, and from that moment on, that's how I envisioned Jimmy to look. So Jimmy had a specific look to him, but Jason did not. It wasn't based on an actor or anyone that I knew. And then there's a character, Archie, who's a homeless man living in New York City. And I've had encounters with homeless men in the city where I kind of reference in my book. Archie became a much bigger character. I've never had that sort of relationship with anyone in New York. But in my neighborhood, there'd be this man, and I would bring him coffee. And I never put sugar in my coffee, but I would bring him coffee, and he would taste it, and he would complain about it not having sugar, and we would laugh about it. And then another homeless man in the neighborhood, I gave him my dinner one night. It was a burger and fries, but it was a veggie burger because at that time I was trying to be vegetarian in New York. Vegetarian, gluten-free, dairy-free. And he opened the bag to see what it was. And he's like, oh, a burger and fries. And I was like, well, it's a veggie burger. And he didn't like that very much either. So a lot of this I built into a larger character. So it was fun just to kind of think about those memories. So it was just... So it was really fun just to kind of come up with all of these different things. That's why I would say inspirations from everywhere, places I've traveled, experiences I've had, conversations I've had with friends and strangers alike. And it was just interesting how it all came together. And a long process, but it's always great to see the final product. And I wanted to read an excerpt from the book, and it's an interesting dynamic between Inez and Sam, and then Jimmy also comes into the book. So I will read that now. And this takes place in Inez's apartment. Just then, her apartment buzzer rang. Expecting someone? Sam said. No, not at all. Sometimes people just buzz around to get in the building if they forget their keys. Just as Sam began to speak, there was another buzz. Geez, give up, buddy. Buzz someone else to let you in, Inez laughed. The apartment's doorbell rang not 5 minutes later. I'm not expecting one. Maybe I should just pretend I'm not home. Shh. Inez placed her finger over her lips. Don't be ridiculous. Are we 5 years old? Go answer the door. What if it's important? Sam asked. Go. Fine. Feeling it was a waste of time, Inez sat down her glass and went to the door. Who is it? Inez asked without opening the door. It's Jimmy. Her heart jumped, and she instinctively turned back to Sam with a look of panic. Sam shrugged her shoulders, oblivious to the issue. Inez hadn't filled her in on Jimmy. Inez hadn't filled anyone in on Jimmy. Inez slowly opened the door and stood staring at him, the man who made her feel a way she'd never felt before. She couldn't feel her body. This whole situation with Jimmy couldn't continue. Hi, he said, looking back at her. Hi, was all Inez could muster. Are you busy? Yes, as a matter of fact, I am. My girlfriend is over, and we're about to head out for dinner. You have to stop surprising me like this. Sam suddenly appeared directly behind them. What's going on? Inez opened the door a little wider. Sam, this is Jimmy. Jimmy, this is Sam. Jimmy nodded his head. It's nice to meet you. You too, Jimmy, Sam said in a tone Inez was very familiar with. She knew she should begin to brace herself. This wouldn't be good. Sam looked between the two of them. Wow, you could cut the sexual tension in this hallway with a knife. What? Don't be ridiculous, Inez laughed nervously. Don't mind my friend. She says whatever comes to mind without thinking of the consequences. She glared at Sam. Jimmy, intrigued, looked at Sam. A woman after my own heart. Why don't you come in, Jimmy? How rude of us to linger at the door, Sam said in a flirty tone. I just explained to Jimmy that we have dinner plans and this wasn't a good time. He was just leaving. Inez began pushing the door closed. Don't be silly. Come on in, Jimmy. 3 is never a crowd. Would you like a glass of wine or a beer? Sam pushed past Inez and took Jimmy by the arm, leading him down the hall. Inez shook her head and closed the door behind them. I would love a beer, please. Inez could tell from his tone that Jimmy was enjoying this very much. Sam grabbed a beer for Jimmy, and he took a seat on the couch. Sam immediately sat on the chair, so Inez would also be on the couch. That didn't surprise Inez, and she knew Sam was having fun with the situation. So, how come I haven't heard anything about you, Jimmy? Inez and I talk about everything under the sun. Jimmy smiled. I'm afraid I can't answer that question. You'll have to ask Inez. There wasn't much to tell you, Inez said, trying to convince herself. I met Jimmy at Jason's family's 4th of July party. Jimmy didn't come across as extremely friendly to me at first. I thought maybe he was just having a bad hair day. We actually met in Brooklyn first, Jimmy interjected. So you know Jason, Inez's fiancé? Sam asked. I'm Inez's fiancé's brother, he said with a grin. Sam's eyes narrowed. I would never have guessed. This could get interesting. Sam looked at Inez and Jimmy and then took a sip of her wine. So why all the tension here? Inez began to sound more impatient, hoping Sam would get the point and stop her inquisition. You mentioned that already, but you're mistaken. There's nothing of the sort coming from me, Inez said. Jimmy cleared his throat and tried to hide his smile. To put it bluntly, I'm extremely attracted to this woman, he said, motioning his hand towards Inez. Inez squinted her eyes. Are you sure this isn't coming from a place of friendly competition you may have with your brother? I've heard that can happen. Sam jumped in, responding to Jimmy and not listening to Inez. Of course, that makes total sense. I'm usually the relationship guru, but I must be losing my touch. You do remember she's marrying Jason, don't you? You sound excited about my situation, Jimmy said. Inez chimed in again, wondering if she would be heard. Well, you can thank Sam for that. She's the one who first got Jason's attention when we met him at the plaza. Whoa, wait a second. Sam put up her hands, looking back and forth between Inez and Jimmy. Is this something more than a simple flirtation? Sam faced Inez. How the hell have you not brought this to my attention yet? We talk all the time about everything, even mundane things like what we have to eat for every meal. Inez stood up and walked her mostly full glass of wine to the sink. Okay, I think this is enough for now. Sam, it's time for dinner. Jimmy, please excuse us. Well, that's my cue. Jimmy got up and headed toward the kitchen. Inez was still standing at the sink with her back to the room. He leaned up against her and reached around to place his beer bottle on the counter, putting his hand over hers. She stood, frozen. He leaned in and whispered in her ear. I never meant to offend you, just the opposite, actually. With that, he let himself out. So that just gives a little bit of an example of the dynamic between Inez and Sam, and then Jimmy, who's actually Jason's brother, who Inez is engaged to. So the book, I think the book has a lot of funny parts. It's lightheaded, but it also has some dramatic tug at your heart scenes as well. And I hope that any of you that read it out there enjoy it. I know it was a labor of love, and I'm really happy to have it out there, and I'm already working on my second book, and it's such a nice thing to be able to write and share part of a story with the world, because I know I'm an avid reader and I enjoy reading, so it's nice to be able to contribute to this world. And now I would take some questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. A lot of people do ask that. I am planning, not right now, I needed to take a break from the story since it was 3 years in the making. I'm writing something completely different now, but I may consider going back for a sequel because I've had many friends and family ask me that already.
Second, I thought your interaction with the street person was incredible, particularly when you returned to New York for the last time and he opened up as to why he became a street person after being a very successful attorney. I thought that really pulled at the heartstrings.
Yeah, that's why there's kind of a mix of lightheartedness, but then seriousness to the story as well.
With regard to the book, would you ever consider having it turned into an audiobook?
Yes, I actually have, and 2 people brought that to my attention right away. One friend who avidly reads audiobooks, so I am looking into that. I actually have it a goal for this year to do, for early in the year, because I didn't realize how many people actually do listen to the audiobooks, so I would love to do that.
So what about Ruby? Where did she actually come from?
Ruby was one of the last characters in the book that I created. For those of you that haven't read a book, she's the owner of a diner where Inez writes. Inez is a freelance writer, so a lot of her work takes place in a diner down the street from her apartment. And Ruby actually came from, with the help of my developmental editor, who thought that I should add more to the story, focus on Inez and her writing and her job. So Ruby just kind of came out of the blue. I just thought it would be neat to focus on. I was thinking of different diners around the city, and it would be neat to have a character like that because she's feisty and spunky and she gets along with Sam. And so that definitely just, it sort of came after the fact when the developmental editor had me thinking about a different character to add in.
I like her a lot because she's so sassy.
She's fun. Yeah, she's part of the lighthearted section of the story. She is a great character. I'm glad that I came up with her in the end. But she was definitely one of the last ones added in. Anyone else?
I know a lot of my authors, as you did as well, refer to some of your inspiration for your characters from people that you know personally. But also, in the aspect of writing that, you ever get the thought in your head to play the role in the movie?
I do. I'm thinking ahead like that all the time, and I start thinking of it. And especially for one of the characters, Jimmy, I always think of the actor Nick Gelfus. So, things do get in your head, and then you can visualize what they look like, and you think about, wow, this would make a great movie. And the book that I'm writing now, I had the story in my head for quite a long time, and I thought it would make a great TV show. So in my head, I was literally visualizing the pilot and what the whole first season would be, and I've only recently decided to put it into a book. So that's what I'm working on now. So that I've already pretty much have it cast as well as to who I would who I would cast in the movie version. Yes, exactly. Exactly. But that's fun. It's fun to think about. Okay. Anyone else? Inez. So that's a tough one. That I haven't quite figured out. Maybe Emily Blunt? I don't know. That's a good one, right? I know, I'm thinking, yeah, I haven't. But I do love her. I just saw her recently in something too. So there's lots of options, I think, for her, right, with the actresses out there. Okay, well, if that's, oh, yes. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. And especially since you're from New York, I hear, yeah, and it's nice. The long hallway, the long narrow hallway, and my friend Simone, who plays Sam's, always like, why are the hallways so narrow in New York and the creaky floor? But I think it helps too with my locations. I did choose New York and Naples just because I'm so familiar with both and I lived in both. So it's really helpful to develop a story when you are familiar with the lots of the sights and sounds and creaks in the floor and just the visuals of what places look like. And any book that I write in the future that may take place in a different location, I would want to go and visit that location and study it for a long time just to make sure you get it correct, because it makes such a difference living or breathing and experience something rather than just kind of envisioning in your head what it may be if you've never visited or been there.
So you've lived in California also. Is that where your inspiration for all the acting comes in?
I think so, because when in my early 20s I pursued an acting career, I've always been involved in the arts. So a lot of that I think does come into play when I'm thinking of TV shows to write or movies to write and books, and that really does help. So I'm always involved in that field and that interest. And I could always write something based in LA, I guess, as well, since I did live there a long time ago.
What's your favorite quote from the book?
My favorite quote from the book. That's a good one. Oh, I know. I don't know if I should say it, though, because it's in the end. It's at the very end, and so I won't say it, just for those that haven't read the book, and I know you haven't read the book, but I actually pulled that quote off of a T-shirt. So I'm sure you'll all, especially being in Florida, you'll know exactly where it came from. But I love it. I love the quote, so. But that's definitely my favorite quote.
I noticed in your final chapter of the book reference to Jimmy, that some people probably would like to know whether that was a Jimmy in the book or another Jimmy. Can you explain that, please?
Yes, so in my acknowledgments, I do thank a Jimmy, and he was when I moved to Naples, I met a Jimmy. I had never known a Jimmy. I don't even, the name came to me from pure fictional purposes, but I started dating a man named Jimmy in Naples, and we dated for a while, but that didn't work out in the end, so I'm not going to take the acknowledgement away. And, I'm remembering all the good times, but completely unrelated, but very random as well, that my book was launching and I met a Jimmy, and it's the first Jimmy I've ever met. So but he's not based on the character in the book. The character in the book, because my book was written 3 years ago. But it's nice. Like I said, I never take any negatives from relationships. I just remember all of the good times, and you can learn something from every relationship. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm really appreciative. Okay.
Well, that's Jimmy's loss when he sees you in Hollywood making a film out of this book. So.
Thank you very much.
This is the book, Unexpected Love. I've got them behind the counter. Kristy will sit right over here and autograph them for you. Try to keep yourselves to 5 or 6 copies apiece. For sale right over there. Get your copy. You're watching online, give us a call. We'll get one signed for you and ship it to you. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.